It was my third month on the night shift at the 24-hour gas station. By now, the slow rhythm of the night had become familiar. The steady hum of the fluorescent lights above, the occasional beep from the cash register, and the distant rush of cars on the highway. At 3 a.m., everything usually settled into a dead calm, and the only visitors were the truckers or the odd insomniac grabbing a coffee or a pack of smokes. Tonight, however, felt different. It wasn't something I could explain, just a feeling in my gut that something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and there hadn't been a customer in over an hour. I leaned on the counter, trying to stay awake, when I heard the door chime. It startled me, more because I hadn't seen anyone pull up outside. I glanced up and saw a man standing by the entrance, but something about him was immediately unsettling. He was tall, his frame gaunt and hunched, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. His clothes were old and dirty, like he'd been wandering for days. But it was his face that really threw me. He was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. His gaze was locked onto mine, and there was something unnerving in the way he stared, like he knew something I didn't. "Can I help you?" He didn't respond, just stood there, that eerie smile never wavering. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "Do you know what time it is?" His voice was raspy, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. I glanced at the clock above the door. "It's 3:47 a.m. He tilted his head slightly, still smiling. "Almost time, then." "Time for what?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. His smile widened, but again, his eyes stayed cold and empty. Without answering, he turned and began to walk around the store. I tried to keep an eye on him while pretending to focus on the register. He moved slowly, stopping at random shelves, running his fingers along the products, but never picking up anything. I thought about calling the police. Something about him felt dangerous, like he was just waiting for the right moment to snap. But then I second-guessed myself. Maybe he was just a weirdo passing through, and I was letting my imagination run wild. I decided to approach him. "Hey man, if you need anything, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave." He stopped, standing in front of the drinks cooler, his back to me. For a moment, I thought he might leave. But then he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "Do you ever wonder why night feels so different?" I didn't know how to answer that, so I stayed silent. He turned around slowly, his smile gone now. "It's because the night doesn't belong to us. We just borrow it, and some things, they don't like to share." I felt a chill run down my spine. I took a step back toward the counter, instinctively putting distance between us. "Look, if you're not gonna buy anything, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave." He stared at me for a long moment, and then, without another word, he walked to the door. But before leaving, he turned back and whispered, "You should leave now before it's too late." The door chimed as he stepped outside. I rushed to the window, watching as he disappeared into the darkness, but I couldn't see where he was going. No car, no footsteps, he was just gone. I stood there for a few minutes, heart pounding, trying to shake the unease that had settled over me. Finally, I decided to lock the door for the rest of the shift. No more late-night wanderers tonight, I told myself. But as I turned to head back to the counter, I heard something, At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it grew louder. A faint whisper, almost like someone speaking just below hearing range. It seemed to be coming from the aisles. I strained my ears, trying to make out the words, but they were too faint. I walked slowly through the store, my heart racing. The whispers grew louder, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find the source. Every aisle was empty. Then, as I reached the back of the store, I saw it. The cooler door was open, even though I had just closed it a few minutes ago. As I stood there, frozen, the lights flickered. A low hum filled the air, the same hum I'd heard every night for months now, but this time it felt different, deeper, like something was alive. The whispers were louder now, and I could finally make out what they were saying. Time's up. In a panic, I ran for the door, fumbling with the keys to unlock it. My hands were shaking. Finally, I got the door open and bolted outside, not stopping until I reached my car. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The station was dark now, the lights completely out. And standing in the parking lot, watching me leave, was the man, smiling. That was the last night I worked the night shift at the 24-hour gas station. It was just another night shift delivering food for the local pizza joint, something I'd been doing for months to make ends meet. The hours were long, but the streets were quiet, and the tips were decent enough to keep me going. On this particular night, things had been uneventful. Orders were coming in at a trickle, and most of the places I'd been delivering to were the usual. Regular customers, quiet houses, nothing strange. Until the last delivery. It came in just before closing. A medium pepperoni pizza, cash on delivery. The address was at the edge of town, past where most of the suburban neighborhoods ended and the more rural houses began. I didn't think much of it at first, just another late night craving someone who lived a little out of the way. I punched the address into my GPS and started driving. As I got further from the city, the houses became fewer, the streets darker. Eventually, I turned onto a narrow road that I hadn't been down before. The trees on either side were thick, their branches hanging low like they were trying to close in over the road. The GPS told me I was only a couple minutes away. That's when I noticed my phone's battery was almost dead. No big deal, I thought. I'd be back at the pizzeria soon. The house appeared suddenly, like it had been hiding behind the trees. It was old, with peeling paint and a sagging porch. No lights were on inside, and the whole place had an abandoned look to it. I double-checked the address. It matched, but something about this didn't feel right. Still, I figured I'd drop the pizza off, collect the cash, and leave. I parked in the dirt driveway and grabbed the pizza. As I approached the front door, I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. No crickets, no wind, just silence. I knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the still night. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Pizza delivery. After a few seconds, I heard movement inside. Slow, shuffling footsteps. The door creaked open just a crack, revealing a silver of darkness inside. A voice, raspy and low, spoke from the shadows. Come inside. My heart skipped a beat. I could barely make out the figure behind the door, but something about the voice made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I hesitated, holding the pizza box a little tighter. I can just leave it here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. No, the voice insisted. You need to bring it inside. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to get out of there. I really can't, sorry. Policy, you know. There was a long pause. Then, the door creaked open a little wider, and for the first time, I saw the person inside, or what I thought was a person. It was an old man, but something about him was wrong. His skin was pale and tight, like it had been stretched too thin over his bones. His eyes were sunken, almost black, and his mouth twisted into a smile that felt more like a sneer. He was standing in the middle of a dark hallway, not moving, just staring at me. "Come inside," he repeated, his voice more forceful now. I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. Every part of me wanted to turn and run, but my feet were frozen to the ground. The man's eyes were locked onto mine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't leave now, I wouldn't leave at all. "I'm sorry, but I can't. You can come out here, though, and get the pizza." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, his smile faded. Without saying another word, he stepped back into the darkness, and the door slammed shut in my face. I stood there, my heart racing, unsure of what had just happened. I didn't want to wait around to find out. I dropped the pizza on the porch, hurried back to my car, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house was barely visible through the trees, but I could have sworn I saw the front door swing open again and a dark figure step out onto the front porch. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town. When I finally pulled over, I checked my phone. The battery had died, and the GPS was off. There was no way to call the shop and explain what had happened. I went back the next day with my boss to check the address, figuring I'd need to apologize or clear up the mix-up. But when we got there, the house was boarded up, abandoned. It had been empty and vacated for years. No one could have placed that order. I never liked working the night shift, but I needed the money. The pay was decent, and the work was simple. Monitor security cameras for a small office building on the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of place that attracted attention, just a few small businesses, some law offices, and a real estate firm. My job was to sit in the back room, watch the live feed, and make sure nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was usually quiet, sometimes too quiet. Tonight started like any other night. I showed up just before midnight, grabbed a coffee from the vending machine, and settled into the worn-out chair in front of the monitors. There were 6 screens, each showing a different part of the building: the lobby, the hallways, stairwells, and the basement storage area, all empty as usual. I leaned back and tried to fight off the sleepiness that always crept in around 2 a.m. The steady hum of the monitors and the faint buzz of the overhead lights were the only sounds. The kind of white noise that made it easy to drift off if you weren't careful. That's when the static started. At first, it was just a flicker on one of the monitors, camera 4, which covered the stairwell leading to the basement. A brief flash of static, then back to normal. I thought nothing of it. Could have been a loose wire or a minor glitch. But a few minutes later, it happened again. This time, it lasted longer, a full 5 seconds of hissing static before the feed returned to normal. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Everything seemed normal again. The stairwell was empty, as it always was at this hour. Still, I made a note in the logbook. Camera 4 glitch, 2:10 a.m. Half an hour passed, and I was starting to think it had been a one-off issue. But just as I reached for my coffee, the static came back, louder, harsher, and this time, It wasn't just camera 4. All 6 monitors flickered, the images breaking up into jagged lines of black and white, the crackling sound growing louder. I stood up, my heart frozen. Something about the noise, the way it seemed to fill the room, set my nerves on edge. I'd worked this shift for months and had never seen anything like this before. Then, through the static, I heard something. A voice. Faint, distorted, like it was being pulled through a broken radio signal. Help me. I froze, staring at the screens, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. The static continued to hiss and crackle, but the voice was gone. Just that one phrase, hanging in the air, making my skin crawl. I glanced down at the logbook, unsure if I should even write this down. Who would believe me? Maybe I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me. But then the static cut out, and the monitors returned to normal. The stairwell on camera 4 was empty again. The lobby was quiet. Everything seemed fine. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a weird technical issue, but I couldn't get that voice out of my head. Another hour passed, and I was starting to relax when I noticed something strange on camera 4 once again. The stairwell wasn't empty anymore. There was someone standing at the top of the stairs just outside the frame, where the shadows were the thickest. I could only see the edge of their silhouette, a hint of a shoulder, part of an arm. They weren't moving. "Hello?" I said out loud, as if they could hear me through the screen. Of course, there was no response. I reached for the building's intercom, which I rarely had to use. It connected the speakers in the lobby to the stairwells, so I can make announcements if needed. I pressed the button. "This is security. Is someone in there?" No answer. The figure didn't move. I couldn't even tell if they were facing the camera or just turned away. They just stood there, like they were waiting for something. I didn't like this. I grabbed the walkie-talkie we used to communicate with the other night guard, Jackson, who patrolled the grounds outside the building. He hadn't checked in for a while, which was unusual. "Jackson, you there?" I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing but static. I called again, louder this time. "Jackson, do you copy?" The same hissing sound filled the walkie, then it cut off abruptly. The silence was worse. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This was wrong. All of it. I wasn't imagining this. I turned back to the monitor, and my heart nearly stopped. The figure was gone. Camera 4 now showed an empty stairwell just as before, but I knew I had seen someone. I hadn't imagined it. Then, on camera 2, which showed the lobby, I saw something move. A figure, the same one I had seen in the stairwell, was standing in the middle of the lobby. They were facing the camera now, but their face was blurred, indistinct, like a smudge on the lens. I could make out the shape of their body, the way they stood unnaturally still, but the details were all wrong. The longer I stared, the more unsettled I became. It was as if the figure wasn't supposed to be there, like it didn't belong in the image. I grabbed the phone and dialed Jackson's number directly. The line rang once, twice, and then static. That same awful hissing filled my ear. And then I heard it again, the voice, clearer this time. "Help me." It was coming through the phone, faint but unmistakable. I slammed the receiver down and bolted for the door. I wasn't about to stick around to figure out what was going to happen. As I reached for the hallway, I glanced back at the monitors one last time. The lobby was empty again. No figure, no shadow, just a cold, lifeless building. but the static was still there, faint, like a distant whisper that followed me as I fled into the night. That was the last time I worked the night shift. I never found out what happened to Jackson, and I never want to know.